Good afternoon, everybody. Let's kick off. We have one session on the syllabus for Mimamsa, but I don't want to rush through this. If we need two, we'll take two. As I keep saying, we kept 2 extra weeks for this, and I've never actually taught. I've never actually just had a course just to focus on Ishvara. So, first time one's teaching a course, you're not quite sure how it's going to go, how much time. But like I've never studied this text before with students, so I don't really have a clear idea how long it's going to take. So I kept 2 weeks at the end, and we may spill it. We've already taken up one of those, at least one of those sessions, and we may need two for this, or 1.5. Because Dusty actually recorded a lecture for us that's only 35 minutes. So we could have 1.5 of Mimamsa and then Dusty's lecture, and that would comprise a week's worth of material. Okay, the Mimamsa, we introduced them last week. I don't really want to spend time going over that again. They're the ritualists, remember. They also are staunch orthodox Vedicists, but they're interested in the older corpus of the Vedas, the sacrificial hymns. They want to perpetuate those hymns just because the Vedas are eternal, and what they enjoin is mandatory, eternally mandatory on human beings. The sacrifice is necessary for the well-being of society, the functioning of the social structures, and also for the ongoing functionality of the universe. That's the belief, that the sacrifice perpetuates, rejuvenates the universe. Now, you may think that's a very pre-modern, simplistic idea. Perhaps it is, but they were formidable philosophers. They excelled especially in meaning and semantics and linguistics, because the Vedas are eternal for them, and therefore words are eternal, and the grammar of the text, the grammar of the Veda is eternal. So they analyzed it meticulously, and so they were really at the background of the amazing grammatical analysis that culminates in the Panini grammar. Panini, the amazing grammarian, I think 3rd or 4th century BC, but don't write that down. Check it on Wiki. And when Western scholars discovered Panini, 2 millennia later, it opened up all new avenues of thinking about language for Western linguists. And in fact, it triggered the whole Indo-European linguistics, the whole sort of field of Indo-European linguistics, which is a very, very huge intellectual enterprise in the sort of late 19th, 20th century. Nowadays, not so many people do historical linguistics, but it was huge back then. So Mimamsas, okay, so what we need to know for our course is they believe the Vedas are eternal. We mentioned this. They don't even like the idea of there being an Ishvara. Even a perfect being speaks the Vedas. You think, well, that's good enough. If it's a perfect being and speaks the Vedas must be perfect. Anything comes out of the mouth of a perfect being must be perfect. No, they're not even going to accept that. Right? Most traditions, their sacred text comes out of the mouth, right? Jesus Christ gives his instructions. It's recorded in the New Testament. Prophet Muhammad receives the instructions from the Archangel Gabriel. So it's sort of coming from God. And therefore, these texts are considered to be perfect, because even though mediated by Jesus or Muhammad, the prophets, they're nonetheless coming from God. So you would think that would be good enough, but for the Mimamsas, no. They don't even want to have a God intervene in the articulation of the Vedas. The Vedas are eternal, and therefore they don't accept cyclical creation. All of these these points are going to surface in the material that we're now going to consider. Let's kick right off, and we'll start with verse 42. The Shloka Vartika, which is the great text written by the great Mimamsa Kumarila. Maybe I'll say a little bit more about him the next recording, okay? But for now, I want to kick off and get some of this and sort of get our feet wet with the arguments against Ishvara by the Mimamsa, okay, one of the 6 schools of Indian philosophy. The theory of the accomplishment of the relation of words and meaning. Okay, so here's a word, pen, and it's related to the object. When I say pen, in your mind, there arises a memory of what a pen is, and a sort of, a concept arises in the mind. Pen, if I say, give me a pen, you don't give me a book. So that's a relationship between a word and the object. So the theory of the accomplishment of the relation based upon conventional rules made these are the conventional rules of semantics, with each utterance of the word has been rejected in the Bhasha. Okay, so some schools would say, the Mimamsa would say the Vedas are eternal, so words are eternal. They just are. The words are eternal and they eternally mean what their reference are. Okay, so pot, if the word pot occurs in the Veda, that means the word pot is an eternal word and it always eternally relates to the object pot. Okay, now other schools such as Nyaya, the logicians that we're going to get to later on in the semester, are going to say, well, they're also going to agree that the relationship between a word and the object is not conventional. Conventional means we just make it up. We decide, we sit around, right, in the caves, and I don't know, if we imagine a Neanderthal scenario, and we encounter some new object, a new animal, and the Neanderthal say, okay, what's that? And then they decide, let's call it a mammoth. And then, so that word is random. It's just sort of arbitrarily selected. Almost all schools of Indian philosophy reject that, at least the Vedic schools. Okay, Buddhists might accept something like that. But the other schools say Ishvara connects meaning, word and meaning. It's Ishvara who, gives language at the beginning of creation, presents language. And language then contains they would accept not really eternal, because other schools accept cyclicality, but more or less eternal relationship of words and objects. Okay, pot means the pot. But the Mimamsas reject that there's conventional rules. They don't accept conventional rules. They say the words are eternal. What rules? They just eternally exist. And as for the fixing of the relation at the beginning of creation, what I just said. So the Nyayikas say at the beginning of creation, Ishvara fixes the relationship between a word and an object. The language comes at the beginning of creation. And so Mimamsas don't like this. So as for that idea, this cannot be, say the Mimamsas, since we do not admit of any time, the world being eternal and as such having no beginning in time. So they don't accept this cyclicality. So they don't accept that Ishvara at the beginning of every new cycle fixes the relationship between word and meaning, word and object. Okay, now this section then is going to go, that's the introduction to their rejection of Ishvara. They start off by saying, we don't even accept an Ishvara who creates language, who indicates what word is going to be connected with what object. Pot is going to be associated with the object pot. Now the objection. Remember, they're always the objector. Everybody introduces the here's an objection. Where's my cursor? Are you with me? We're on, where's the cursor? Oh, it's very sunny here. But if there be such a person as would create the world, okay, Ishvara, of course, is on God, Ishvara. So they're saying if there is a God or an Ishvara who would create the world and then set going the processes of Dharma and Adharma, okay? So the previous cycle, souls that don't get liberated, they all go into a state of hibernation. We've discussed this. I'm just reminding you, all the karma goes into a state of latency. And in the new cycle, those souls get re-injected into the forms of the world and connected with their karma. Karma means dharma and adharma, pious and impious activities. Good and bad actions create good and bad reactions. That whole process is called karma. Karma means the original act and the corresponding effect. It's a good act, good effect, bad act, bad effect, and of course every shade of gray in between. When we're talking about black and white, you can fill in an infinity of shades of gray. But to understand gray, you have to understand black and white. If someone says to you, what's gray? What are you going to say? It's a mixture of black and white. So if we understand black and white, we understand every shade of gray. We'll say a little bit more black, a little less white, and we create a particular shade of gray. So that's called dharma and adharma. And please know these words. We'll run into them in the Bhagavad Gita. Dharma is doing your correct duties. People have multiple dharmas. Your professional dharma, that's one set of dharmas. Like your students, your dharma is to do all the reading, watch all the videos, my friends. If you want to be dharmic, you want to do your dharma, you got to do the whole course. And adharma means, you blow it off. I'm not going to do all the reading. You just listen to the lectures. That's adharma. So according to you do dharma and adharma, you get the corresponding results. Okay. So karma means dharma and adharma, good and bad deeds. Remember all the shades of gray in between. We're just going black and white here. Good and bad deeds and good and bad reactions. Meaning the birth you get in the next life, quality of life in the next life, Are you going to have good access to resources? Are you going to find a good partner? Are you going to be handsome and attract a mate? All of those things is karma. Okay, so I'm wearing glasses. That means I have some kind of bad karma that's caused me that I can't see as well as everybody else. So that's all karma. Okay, so if there is an Ishvara who kickstarts the karma from the previous cycles and connects it to the souls injected into the next cycle, and also the uses and relations of words, and also what we just discussed, sets off language, saying, okay, this sound, pot, is going to be connected to this object, pot. So that's the uses. When uses of language, we use the word pot, so that I say, give me a pot, you're going to give me a pot and not something else. That's the uses and the relations of the word pot and the object. And if there were an Ishvara who put all that in motion for the sake of the world, then such a fact would not in any way vitiate the Veda. This whole thing in quotation is the objector. The objector says, look, we understand you Mimamsas, want to have a perfect Veda. We get it. You want to do your rituals, and why do you think you should be doing your rituals? Because the Vedas say so. Therefore, you want the Vedas to be perfect. We get that, but you don't need to say the Vedas are eternal. You can just say they come from Ishvara, a perfect being. That's the objection, the apauruṣeya. Now you get the response. Here's the reply. We're used to this now, my friends. We've seen this in Vedanta. This is Indian philosophy. You always bring up opposing points of view. You see how this makes it intellectually stimulating and non-dogmatic. Because you're always saying, okay, well, our objectors say this. How do we respond? Surely that's what in pure, real intellectuality is about. You may have a point of view, but you have to defend it and argue for it and demonstrate logically and through reason and argument, not just through assertion, not just through yelling. You have to be able to defend it against opposing views. So that's the reply, okay? Apauruṣeya reply. So, yet this theory is as difficult to prove as an omniscient person. So previously, we haven't read that section. The Mimamsa reject the idea of an omniscient person because the yoga tradition is going to say not just Ishvara, but even yogis can attain a state of omniscience, not the same as omniscience as God, but an incredible state of expanded awareness. And the Mimamsa have rejected that earlier. We don't have time to look at those arguments. But he's saying it's as difficult to prove as an omniscient person, which they've already discussed and rejected. Hence, we have not admitted it. We Mimamsas, we don't accept it. We don't accept this idea that Ishvara, even though Ishvara may be perfect, he sets language in motion and he triggers off karma, dharma, and adharma, the effects of previous actions in the previous cycle, previous creative cycle. He kickstarts it in the next cycle. I'm sorry if I'm a bit animated today. I drank a whole cup of coffee. I'm not used to drinking coffee. And now I'm all jittery. So it makes me talk faster than I should be talking. So I'm sorry about that. I didn't. Someone was making coffee, so my higher self said, no, don't drink it. You're recording a class and you need to be calm. And then I just said, what the hell, I drank it. So now I'm a little bit, but let's forge forward. 45. At a time when all this earth, water, this world, this creation, all, earth and water and all the elements, at the time when it didn't exist, in other words, before creation, what could have been the condition of the universe? As for Prajapati himself, the creator, another word for the creator, don't worry about it, just let's plug in creator. What could be his position and what his form? What kind of a being before creation could have existed? What form did that being have? There's no creation. So how could that being have had a form? What's the form made of? That's going to be the sort of argument we're going to run into. At that time, when no men existed, right, before creation, who would know him and explain his character to the later created persons, right? How do we know about God? We know about something because, somebody sees an elephant and then goes back, and then up in the Himalayas and then goes back down to South India where there's no elephants and say, look, I saw this creature, and he tells everybody else, and then it gets handed down. That knowledge of the elephant gets handed down in tradition. But so if you want to say God, knowledge of God is handed down in tradition that way. Remember, Vedanta doesn't say that. They say the scriptures are how we know God. But let's go with the argument. Every so often, I'm going to sort of throw in a little bit of how Vedanta would respond, Ramanuja and Shankara. But here the Mimamsa is saying, at that time, Kumarila, at that actually the Shloka Vartika, at that time, who would know him and explain his character to the later created persons? There was nobody there. So how could anyone know God in the beginning and then hand down that knowledge? So how would you know anything about God? How do you know there is a God? There's no one there in the beginning to testify to that. That's the argument. If it be held that he cannot be perceived by any man, so the answer might be, well, yes, but you can't see God. So then they say, okay, if you want to argue like that, there are human senses or material senses, which of course any theist would say, including Vedanta. You can't see him with what they call fleshy eyes of flesh. And of course, Christians and Muslims would say a similar sort of thing. We can't see God with our physical instruments. God can only be known through scripture. And then, eventually one can go to the kingdom of God and know him in some different sort of way, but not when we're embedded and embodied in these forms. So, but if it be held that he can't be perceived by any man, as Vedanta would say, without perception or cognition of some sort by some person, how can we determine this fact of his existence? If you say you can't see God, well, fine, say that then. But then how do we know God then? If you can't see him, if you can't see something, you can't make an inference, right? You have to have, well, let's not go there. We'll wait for that argument. But here, all he's saying is without perception, then on what authority do we accept that there is a God? No one's seen him. That's the argument. And these are atheistic arguments. You'll see that many atheists today will say that. How do you know there's a God? Prove it. Can you show it to me? Can I see it? Can you show it to me in the same way I can see this microphone? So these arguments, theistic and atheistic, similar kinds of arguments, they go back to the beginning of human history, my friends. There's always been arguments for God and arguments against God. And obviously everybody makes a decision which side of the fence they choose to sit on. Then again, he says, in what manner do you believe the world to have had a beginning in time? Why do you think it had a beginning in time? Actually, the ancient Greeks and all thought the world was eternal. And, Christian philosophers, they borrowed Greek philosophy, but they had to sort of add Greek philosophy onto the Bible, because that's what it means to be a Christian and a Jew and Jewish philosophers. And the Bible says there was a creation in the beginning, and that's always been a bit of a problem for Christian theologians and Jewish and Christian intellectuals to sort of, that was the one bit of Greek philosophy they couldn't accept, because their Bible prohibited them from accepting that. Bible's very clear that there was, creation in whatever it was, 6 days. Then when the Big Bang sort of hypothesis emerged, I think that was the 50s or 60s, but don't quote me on that. Somebody can look it up on Wiki. And, send me an email or I'll look it up in Wiki. Then that was good for Christian scientists because Big Bang says there was a point, a creative moment. So that was sort of a kind of that Christian scientists were able to breathe a bit of a sigh of relief when the Big Bang hypothesis became widely accepted. But anyway, where are we? How did it come to be? If he would have said what caused the Big Bang. Kumarila would have said that. If he wants the creation to be the author of this text would have said, Kumarila, what caused the Big Bang? I mean, that really is a big question, actually. It's a metaphysical question. It was before science, before space and time, cause and effect. But you've heard me say a fair bit about that already. So in what manner do you believe the worlds have had a beginning in time? If it be held that it is brought about by a desire on the part of Prajapati, just plug in Ishvara here, then since Ishvara is held to be without a material body, how could he have any desire towards creation, right? So before creation, if there were a God in Ishvara, well, God wouldn't have a body, because what's the body going to be made of? Matter hasn't been created yet. Now notice the assumption that a body has to be material. The Vaishnava tradition, Ramanuja's tradition says, no, God doesn't have to have a material body. Why do you say that God has a material body? He has a spiritual body, and therefore he could have existed before matter in a spiritual body. But that possibility doesn't seem to surface curiously, I'm actually writing a book on this, doesn't seem to surface either in Western thought or in other Indian schools. But let's put that aside for another day. So how could he have any desire? To have a desire, you have to have, normally you have a desire because you have a body with senses, and your senses perceive sense objects, and then you desire those sense objects. So normal desire, if you think of a desire, go into your mind, think of a desire. What do you desire? You desire to get a good grade in this course. So that's based on your physical experience. You're taking this course, you're listening to lectures, you signed up for the course, you have to graduate, you have to have a GPA. Those are all material things. And they cause, and so a desire is the result of wanting a material thing. It doesn't have to be a gross thing like a pot, but it could be something like passing an exam, right? So, but before creation, what are you going to desire? There's nothing there to desire. So the argument is, how could he have any desire towards creation before creation? What would that desire consist of? Of course, the Upanishads would say he desired to create. That was the desire. But Kumarila is going to probe that. He's going to problematize that. Now, if he has a body, okay, you say, well, he has a body, therefore he can have desires, because desires are sort of an extension of our body in the sense contact with sense objects, as we just said, right? A body is made of senses and organs of perception. If he had such a body, surely this body could not have been created by himself. Who created the body? Matter creation hasn't happened yet. We're talking about before creation. The desire to create requires a body according to Kumarila's logic. We can question it. We can poke holes in that and say, why, as I just said, why does that body have to be material? But let's bracket that. So what kind of a body? He couldn't have a body then, because matter hasn't been brought into existence. And he couldn't have been created by himself. I don't know why. Yeah, let's see why he says this body could not have been created by himself. And why couldn't one say that God just desired a body, boom, and then creates, and then engages the rest of creation? Well, let's see if he gives an answer to that. Thus, then we would have to postulate another creator for his body, and so on. In other words, if he has a body, then that means that the matter of the body has to be existing. So who created the matter for God's body? There must have been another creator then. And then the same question for that creator. Why did that creator desire to create a body for the second God? Then he would need a God. That would be a third God. And you'd end up with an infinite regress, a vicious regress. So if Prajapati's body be held to be eternal now, so then he says, well, okay, that's one issue. But let's say the opponent says, well, Ishvara's body is eternal, right? So if you say that, says Kumarila, remember, they're always engaging opposing arguments. If you say that, well, so long as earth, water have not been produced, of what material would the body be composed? Even if you say that God's body is eternal, well, what's it made of then? Because matter hasn't been created. Again, let's stress this because, as I said, I'm writing a book on this very issue. It's going to be called in defense of a God with form. And notice the assumption here. Of what material would that body be composed? Because earth and water have not been created. So Kumarila doesn't entertain the fact that there could be a body that is not made of matter, which is precisely what the many theists, the Vishnu tradition, the Vaishnava tradition of ancient India would posit. The body is Satchidananda. It's pure Brahman. It's pure consciousness, condensed consciousness. So it's not a material body. Then again, in the first place, how is it that he should have a desire to create the world? He says, okay, so that's one problem. How would God create? He doesn't have a body, so he can't have desires. So what would trigger creation? So that's one issue. Now he's going on to another problem from his point of view. Another problem that the theists, those who believe in Ishvara, have another problem to face. And what's that? Then again, meaning now here's another argument. In the first place, how is it they should have a desire to create a world? Why would he desire to create a world which is fraught with all sorts of troubles to living beings? Why create a world that's suffering? And now remember, Ramanuja engages this. Ramanuja would say he creates the world to, suffering and happiness and suffering, depending on the karma of living beings. So he creates a world that accommodates the karma of living beings. But here, Kumarila is why would he create a world fraught with suffering? For at that time, at the beginning of creation, he has not got any guiding agency in the shape of virtue and sin, etc., of the living beings themselves. A good argument. If you want to say that the creation is to accommodate the karma of the living entity, so there's forms that, good births, bad births, and all shades of gray births, but those births reflect the karma of all the souls. If you say that, then he's saying, well, in the beginning, there wasn't any karma, because it's the beginning. So then why would there be, then why would he create them? There's no karmic requirement to create bodies in accordance with the law of karma, because there wasn't any karma. So why would he create in the very first instance? Now remember, the Vedantins would say a previous cycle, but Mimamsa doesn't accept that. They don't accept the cyclical creativity. So they say in the beginning, why create in the first place? There's no karma. There must have been, at the very beginning means no karma. Nor can any creator, now he goes on to another argument. Nor can any creator create anything in the absence of means and instruments, right? Normally you have a potter wants to create a pot, well, you need a potter's wheel. You need an implement to push into the clay to make the hole. So you need instruments. And he's saying, but there's no instruments at the beginning. So no creator can create anything in the absence of means and instruments. You can't create something without the instruments and accessories. To talk to creation, okay, do you see the arguments? Even the production of the spider's net. Remember the Upanishads? Creation is like a spider shooting out a web. He says even that is not held to be without some sort of material basis, as the net is spun out of the saliva. He's saying even the spider's example, it's not that the spider web just magically appears with no instrument. It's actually made out of the saliva. It does have an instrument. So he's then poking holes in the metaphor that goes back to, you may recall, the spider's web. And if you don't recall that, you might want to review that, my friends, before the quiz. Right. So the spider's net it has an instrument, the saliva of the spider. I don't know if we would call it saliva in our day and age, but I don't know that. It is produced out of the body of the animal, of the flies eaten by the spider. So that saliva comes from the spider eating flies. A very nice image for your lunchtime break. The spider eats the insects, and then the body processes it and makes the web. And so therefore, even the spider, you want to use the spider as a metaphor for God creating the world. Well, the spider requires instruments and accessories outside of itself. It requires bugs that it can eat and transform into the web. Okay, so he's actually problematizing the Upanishadic metaphor. If it be held, now another argument, whenever he says if it be held, another argument, that Prajapati, Ishvara, right? Wherever there's Prajapati, I'm going to keep repeating this, my friends, because sometimes repetition is helpful. Don't be offended. There's a certain amount of Sanskrit. It's an ancient text. I'm trying to make it easy for you. I always appreciate it when I'm sitting in on philosophy of religion courses in the philosophy department, and I know nothing about Western philosophy. And they use all these terms, and you forget after a while. So I'm always grateful for repetition. So I hope you don't mind. And if some of you might feel like I've repeated it already, well, be kind to other people in the class that maybe appreciate repetition. Right? Let's be compassionate with each other. So if it be held that Prajapati creates the world out of pity, then we say, in the absence of objects of compassion, in the shape of living persons, no pity or compassion could be possible for him, right? If you want to say that Ishvara creates the world out of pity, but pity for whom? There's nothing in it. There's no living entity. So that's a silly argument, says Mimamsa. And if he were urged to creation by pure compassion, and then he would create only happy beings. And if he really did want to create out of some kind of kindness or compassion, even though that's a problem, because there's no beings in the first place, but let's ignore that. Let's say he does that. Well, why wouldn't he create a perfect world? Why would he create, he would only create happy beings. Now, another argument, right? So Kumara is predicting all of his opponents, the opposing points of view to his position. So whenever you have, if it be held, if it be urged, that's the port of apauruṣeya, the opposing points of view. If it be urged that, quote, without some pain, neither creation nor the continuation of the world would be possible. So someone would say, I don't know how they would, what would be the logic underpinning this, and Kumara is not presenting it to us, so we don't need to let it detain us. If it says that neither the creation nor the continuation of the world would be possible, then we reply that when everything depends upon the mere will of the creator himself, what would be impossible for him? He's saying, well, if you're going to posit a creator, then he can do anything. So why didn't he make a happy world? What would be impossible for him? How do you explain suffering? You're right. Kumara's opponent wants to say, well, there has to be some pain, otherwise you couldn't have creation. Then Kumara said, if there really is an Ishvara, he doesn't have to depend on anything. He can just do anything he wants by will. So how do you explain suffering then? At the same point. Next point. And if he were, next argument, to depend upon laws and agencies, that's karma, action, reaction. If he were to depend upon karma, so he creates according to karma, then this would deprive him of his boasted independence. All the theists say, well, God is independent, can do anything, he's omnipotent, he's not bound by any laws. You can't say he creates because of karma, because that means he's bound by the law of karma. Then how's he independent then? If he were really independent, he'd create a nice world full of happiness. And if you say, well, he doesn't because he's bound by the law of karma, he has to respect the law of karma, so he creates a mixed world to accommodate the mixed karma of some souls are good, some are bad in the previous cycle, then he's not independent then if he has to obey the law of karma. Of course, the Vedantin would say he doesn't have to obey it. He chooses to obey it. He's not bound by it. He sets up the law, and it's his law, and then he chooses to obey it. But if he break it anytime he wants, in fact, Bhakti tradition says Ishvara can intervene in your karma. If you surrender to God in Bhakti, then God eliminates the karma. So there's all of these arguments are counter arguments, but right now we're giving the non-theists a chance to have their say. We want to hear their voice. Okay, so I'll say a little something about responses to Kumara, but keep in mind that right now we're focusing on his arguments. So then, if he were to depend upon karma, laws and agency means karma, then this fact would deprive him of his boasted independence, right? You theists keep boasting God is omnipotent, God is omniscient. But if he's omnipotent, then you can't say he has to abide by the law of karma in his creation. You say he desires to create the world. Will you let me know then? If you say that, then let me know what is the end that he did. What is that end which he desires, and which could not be gained without creating the world? What exactly does he want? You say he desires to create. Then why? Why? What does he gain from that which he couldn't gain without creating the world? He's God. He doesn't have to create a world to satisfy some desire of God. First of all, God shouldn't have any desires because he should be completely fulfilled, completely content, and completely complete. But if you say, okay, that he has some end, well, why couldn't he achieve that end just by willing it? Why does he have to create a world to achieve the end? Why does he have to go through this laborious process of creating the world and then achieve whatever that end is, whatever that motive is that he had in the first place? Let him just satisfy that motive. Shouldn't have a motive in the first place, right? God shouldn't have any desires, but let's bracket that. Let's say he has a desire, right now for the sake of this argument. Why does he have to create to fulfill the desire? Later on, they're going to critique the very notion that God has a desire in the first place. So what would he gain? But without some end in view, without having a motive, right? They're questioning what is God's motive for creation. Now they're just saying without having some motive, even a fool doesn't act. If you act, it means you have a motive, or even a fool wouldn't act without a motive. Then if he were to act without any view in mind, if he just sort of acts doesn't have a desire, doesn't have a view, doesn't have a motive, then what would be the good of his intelligence? That's foolish. First of all, he says, even a fool doesn't do that. If you say, well, God doesn't have any end, he just creates, well, then that means you're not very smart then. Because even a fool has a motive to create. So you're going to say God doesn't have a motive, just creates? Well, that's not very, then what would be the good of his intelligence? Then he's not very smart. So, it's good to see, arguments on whatever you believe in, my friends, students, whatever you believe. It's always good to, don't be fanatic about it, dogmatic about it. In life in general, if you don't mind me offering you this few words, always consider the opposing point of view. And then when you really listen to an opposing point of view, you actually learn something. And then you also learn maybe the weaknesses of your own point of view. That doesn't mean you need to give up your own point of view. Every point of view has weaknesses. Anything, scientific, philosophical, theological, any point of view in human history has some kind of Achilles heel, a weak point, some kind of presupposition, that a foundational truth that's just accepted just because. there was a big bang just because there was a, whatever it is. But when you open yourself up to the opponent's kind of critique of your view, you may still think your view is better than the opponent's. It's good to acknowledge weaknesses, because every position has a weak point or multiple weak points, and that makes you humble. And then you can actually have a conversation. Say, yeah, well, I know my point of view has this defect, that defect, but I still think it's better than maybe your point of view, because I feel that, the defects in your point of view are greater, right? This is what this is all about. There's the opposing point of view, and then you present your point of view. But it's really good. And that's, I think, the wonderful thing about Indian philosophy. Always, every step of the way, we saw it with Shankara, we saw it with Ramanuja. Every step of the way, the opponents, you can barely say one thing. In each of these verses, there's even 2 or 3 opposing points of view. How intellectually rich and non-dogmatic and open-minded and real, and really intellectual is that? You're really open, you're really looking for truth. And if you're really looking for truth, you're going to consider all points of view, even if they challenge yours. Okay, it's called Vada in Indian philosophy. There's different kinds of debates in Indian philosophy, and one of them is there's Jalpa, there's Tarka. One of them is you just want to win. Doesn't matter what the truth content of the debate is. You want to win, and that's just ego. And the other is just wrangling. You attack another person's point of view, you deconstruct it, but you don't actually present your own point of view. That's rejected by Vedanta, those 2 modes. And there's a couple of others that they reject. Cheating, like you actually cheat in the debate. Someone's trying to say one thing, and you construe their argument. You try to say that they've actually said something else. So you try to win by unfair means. So there's various forms of debate which Vedanta rejects, right? Just trying to defeat an opponent without just winning, without actually being interested in truth. Number 1, there's called Tarka, there's Jalpa, there's Chala. They all have names. The other is to try to defeat an opponent without presenting your own point of view. And they accuse the Nagarjuna and certain Buddhist Madhyamikas of that, and so on. But then what the Vedantas say, and out of these different types of debate, the one that we're interested in is called Vada, where both parties this is the perfect debate. The ideal debate is both parties are actually seeking truth. And if you're really seeking truth, you're going to be open to the fact that maybe your position might have weaknesses, or maybe it is a better position. And therefore, you're always going to be open to, so that your debate or discussion or dialogue is actually, you're really seeking truth. And if someone points out a defect and you're really seeking truth, you'll be humble and honest enough to accept it and say, yes, my position is defective, and then you might accept the opponent's point of view, or at least accept some part of it. So let's keep going. If the activity of the creator were due to a desire for mere amusement, remember the Vedanta, Ramanuja, why does he create? Leela, remember the word Leela, play like a king. He just does stuff for amusement. He doesn't need to, doesn't desire. It's just playfulness. And it's called Leela. So now Kumara says, well, what's this? What's all this about then? If the activity of the creator were due to desire for mere amusement, this Leela, then that would go against his ever-contentedness. Don't you theists say that God is perfect? And if you're perfect, you're fulfilled internally. You don't need anything outside of yourself. You don't need to do anything. We do something because we were missing something. We miss something, so we act in the world to gain something. We have some end. Action is triggered by a motive, for Mimamsa. But God shouldn't have any motive, because God should be perfectly self-fulfilled and self-content. So if you say he had a desire for amusement, what is he, bored? Is he bored and he has to create just to sort of while away time, like playing a game or something? Monopoly, right? What do we do? Oh, boring. Well, let's play Monopoly. Is that God like that then? Oh, let me create a universe. That doesn't sound very godly, does it? So he said, if you say that he has a desire for mere amusement, then that would go against his ever-contentedness. Don't you theists? Right, remember, he's an atheist, near Ishvara. Atheism is called near Ishvara. Remember Vada? Vada is a point of view that's seeking truth. So Ishvara Vadins are the ones that accept Ishvara. And the ones who don't, the non-theists, like Kumarala, near Ishvara Vada. Okay, I'm going to tell you more about Kumarala in next class, but I forgot to look up his dates. I want to say 8th to 9th century, but I don't want to record it forever. So let me check a little bit about Kumara, who wrote this text. I think he's 8th, 9th century. I think he may be contemporary, he may be contemporaneous with Shankara. Boy, that was a tongue twister. A contemporary of Shankara. Too much coffee. So if you say he had a desire for amusement, that would go against his supposed ever contentedness. And instead of affording any amusement, and even if you say that, okay, God has a right to create for godly amusement, right? Just if you want to say that, then let's allow that. Then the great amount of work required for creation would be a source of infinite trouble for him, right? Even in the Old Testament, God took 6 days to create and he rested on the 7th, right? You read the Genesis, those of you that know the Bible, the first chapter of Genesis, creation, right? God creates, I don't know, the firmament, and the first day he does this, and the second day he creates whatever it is, the oceans, and then the fowl, and then the beast, and then whatever it is, right? 6 days of creation of things of the world, and the 7th day he rested. Well, why would he need to rest then? Is he tired? So then something like that is what, because Kumara didn't know about the Old Testament, but he's saying something like that. Does he need to rest? And instead of affording any amusement, the great amount of work required for creation, that will be a source of infinite trouble to him. And the next thing is, remember, Vedantins say there's creative cycles. That means there's creation, but there's also dissolution at the end, right? Second verse of the Vedanta Sutra. What is Brahman? Jamadhyasya yataha. That from which creation, maintenance, and dissolution emerge. So now he's going to attack this idea of dissolution. It's called pralaya, dissolution of the universe at the end of whatever it is, 14 billion years, it dissolves. And his desire to destroy the world at pralaya too would be hardly explicable. Why would you create and destroy it? What's the point in having cyclical creation? Just have creation. And anyway, so all of these points, why have a dissolution then, right? One problem is why create in the first place, but so we've given those arguments, but now let's say, okay, fine, you created. Well, fine, you created, why dissolve it then? What's the point of that? Smashing up everything you laboriously created. And then he goes back to this argument, the old argument that we had above. And above all, such a creator could never be known by anybody. How would he be known? Even if he were known in form. Now notice the way he argues. He rejects a possibility. There's no, he could never be known. But then, and this is typical of Indian philosophy. You reject a possibility, and then you say, well, even if, let's allow, for argument's sake, let's allow that, even though we don't accept it, we've just disproved it, we've just rejected it, we've just given arguments why it's not tenable, but we've done that, but even if we allow it, still there's problems. Still, you're going to have to face this issue. This is how Indian philosophical exposition goes. So here's an example. Even if he were known in form, the fact of his being the creator could never be known. How would you ever know it? Because at that, and he's going back to the old argument, because at that time, even if you allow he has a form, a body, because at that time, in the beginning of creation, the infancy of creation, what could the other living beings appearing at the beginning of creation understand? If at the beginning of creation, the souls are re-injected, what would they understand? They'd have no bodies, they'd have no minds yet. There's not been creation of matter to give them bodies. What could they understand about God? They could not understand where from they've been born. They wouldn't know where they came from. Nor could they understand the state of the world prior to creation. They couldn't understand that they'd been in a state of hibernation, because that hibernation means you're fast asleep. You're covered in tamas. And they couldn't understand the Prajapati being the creator, Ishvara. Nor could the idea, right? Let's see how we're making some progress here, my friends. We're doing okay. We still need, I think, another half a session at least, but I'm quite happy. We're chugging along. Maybe I should drink more coffee. Hope I'm not going too fast. Nor could the idea that they would derive from his own assertion with regard to his being the creator be altogether trustworthy. Let's say God tells you, I am the creator, right? So that's his assertion. How would that be trusted? I don't know if you think this is a good argument. Tell me what you think. How could that be trustworthy? Because even though he may not have created the world, he might speak of having done so in order to show off his great power. Seems a bit of a silly argument, but why not? I mean, sometimes silly arguments you think, actually, yeah, how do I disprove that? It may sound silly, but and you sit and think, wait a minute, how do I respond to that? So how do you respond to that? Let's say there's a God, and he then somehow communicates to the souls, even though we've already problematized that and we've already established that's impossible, but let's allow that. There is a God, and he says to the souls, I am your creator. I am the Lord thy God, right? How do you know he's not lying? How do you know he's trustworthy? Because even though he may not have created, maybe he didn't create the world, somebody else did, or maybe the world's eternal, but this God then tells you, I'm the creator. How do you know? Why would you trust him? He might speak of having done so in order to show off his great power. That's not a logical impossibility, my friends. In philosophy, you have logical impossibilities, like a square circle. That's a logical impossibility. You cannot have a square circle. But other things are not logical impossibilities. It's not logically, you can't bring in a logical refutation of the possibility that God could be a liar. How do you refute that? We don't know. Maybe it's a lie. Maybe it's a demon. Even Descartes said, well, what if God's a demon? Maybe maybe he's an evil scientist. It's not logically impossible. Extremely unlikely, but it's not a logical impossibility. So that's what he's saying here. He might speak of having created just to show off, like he's bragging. It's something, we can read this with a sense of humor, my friends, but also they're actually arguments that are not so easy to refute. In the same manner, the Veda that would proceed from him would only be doubtful. So if he's a liar, then the Vedas that come out, you Ishvara people want to say that Ishvara pronounces the Veda at the beginning of time. If he's a liar, then the Vedas could be full of lies. So in the same manner, the Veda which would proceed from him, if he was a liar, would only be doubtful, and hence could not be admitted as a sure proof of his existence. And Mimamsa doesn't like this possibility. They don't want any possibility that the Veda is a product of lies. So that's why maybe another reason why they say it's eternal. And as for that Veda which is eternal, how could it make a mention of facts and processes with reference to the living beings, etc.? And what's he saying there? Oh, he's still rejecting the idea of creation. If the Veda was eternal, but there's no creation in between cycles, then what do the words of the Veda refer to? He's not bringing in this argument to reject the Vedas, but to reject cyclical creativity. For if the Veda existed before the objects created, in between the cycles, then there would be no connection between this Veda and the objects created. If you want to, let's say, the Vedas is eternal, but the creation is cyclical, well, in between creative cycles, what do the words of the Veda refer to? The words of the Veda refer to things in creation, like pots and sacrifices and ingredients for the sacrifice, but they haven't been created yet. So what would the words of the Vedas be referring to? Therefore, the passages occurring in the Veda, which appear to describe the process of creation, must be interpreted as praising up something else. So you'll have to come up with an argument that those words have some other function. Let's not worry about that. Let's skip the next verse. We're not particularly great arguments. Now, the use of the Mahabharata, the sort of stories of ancient India. The Mahabharata is the great battle. It's one of the two great epics of ancient India. It's the biggest epic ever written in human history. 100,000 verses. And it's the story of Krishna we're going to encounter. In fact, the Bhagavad Gita at the end of the semester is in the Mahabharata. It's right in the middle. It's 750 verses of the Mahabharata. So the use of the Mahabharata too in the matter of Dharma, right? So the Mahabharata is the Dharma text. It's all about Dharma. It's a fantastic epic because Dharma, again, is not black and white, it's shades of gray. And the Mahabharata is all about shades of gray. What do you do when there's a conflict of dharmas? In fact, the Gita is about a conflict of dharma, right? Arjuna has a dharma towards his army to protect them, and he has a dharma towards his guru and grandfather on the other side. He's supposed to worship and honor his guru and grandfather. But that's one dharma. But another set of dharmas is to protect his army, his commander-in-chief, one of the commanders. In order to protect his army, he's going to kill Bhishma and Drona, his guru and his grandfather, because they're going to wipe out his army, and they do. And the only way to protect his army is to kill his own grandfather and guru. This creates a conflict. The conflict, he's supposed to be honoring, worshipping his guru and grandfather on one hand, but he's supposed to protect his army. To protect them, he has to kill those whom he should be pujarhau in Sanskrit. They're worthy of puja. Conflict of Dharma. So the Mahabharata is written to sort of, you know, present the codes of Dharma and then sort of and sort of discuss what to do in these tricky areas of gray. So the use of the Mahabharata too, in the matter of Dharma, etc., is in the form of telling stories. You say it's just stories, you know. The Mimamsas don't even accept them as true, and the Puranas, Shiva and Krishna, they just say, look, these are just stories. They're stories, just like that of the Vedic passages, which seem to mention certain processes, while they only praise certain sacrifice. Even the Vedas have these little stories. He says, but we don't take them literally. They're just meant to sort of, you know, like parables. They're meant to impart higher meaning of how to perform rituals. We don't take, in other words, they were kind of like critical scholars. They were like, you know, non-literalists. They didn't take a literal position on the scriptures. They said, no, these are just allegories. They're just sort of, these stories are just meant to sort of give some other kind of meaning, right? So how does he put it? They only praise certain sacrifices. The stories are just meant to sort of praise the efficacy of the sacrifices. All the stories around, like Yudhishthira's great, huge Ashvamedha sacrifice at the end of the war. He does this huge sacrifice, the horse sacrifice, and it's a big production. And there's a whole story about he sends his brothers around to conquer the 4 directions, and he sends the horse wandering in the Ashvamedha sacrifice. He sends the horse wandering to the neighboring kingdoms, and then the neighboring kingdoms, the horse goes into the kingdom. Now that when the horse, and it's followed by the army follows the horse, and when the horse goes into the other kingdom, then that king has a choice. Either he fights, he tries to get the horse and fights the army, or he accepts the power of the army and says, yes, I'm not going to fight, and gives tribute. And that tribute Yudhishthira wants to use for the performance of this massive, you know, gold is offered lavishly, huge sacrifice. So the point that Kumara is saying, all that story about the horse and all of this and the Mahabharata and the war, it's all just to, it's not real. It's just meant to embellish the value of sacrifice. So that's what he's saying here. So the use of the Mahabharata, that story I just told you is in the Mahabharata, Yudhishthira, the horse sacrifice, is in the form of telling stories, exemplifying and praising of certain duties and sacrifice. Same as the Vedas has the same sort of stories. Therefore, the notion of creation proceeding from Prajapati Ishvara got from these, in other words, the Mahabharata talks about creation, the Ishvara creates. The Puranas are another genre of text where you get the stories of Shiva, the Shiva Purana, Vishnu Purana, and they talk about Shiva and Vishnu as the creators of the universe. He's saying they're just all stories. They're mistaken. He just says that, you know, we don't accept them. They're just stories for less intelligent folks, simpleton. Because mere storytelling. Anyway, he's made that point. Let's move on. And we move on towards conjunction. Up we go a little bit. How much are we doing for time? Could be 20 more minutes. So what does he say? Okay, sorry, let's go here. If there were any such thing as the first activity of the Veda, if the Veda is first, let's say, expressed by God at the beginning of creation, by Ishvara, if there were a first beginning of the Veda, towards injunction, right? The Veda tells us what to do. Scripture tells us what to do, whether it's a Bible or the Quran, it tells us what to do. So if there were a first origin of that, even if it was Ishvara himself, this would mean that the Vedas had a beginning. Then we could never have an idea of the fact of it's not being composed by anybody, but being an eternal in itself. Mimamsa wants to say it's eternal, not that it was articulated by any being, even a godlike being. He says, so we don't accept these stories of creation. The theory, too, that during universal dissolution, the Veda resides in the person of Prajapati, remember Prajapati is Ishvara, could be best only considered doubtful, right? What happens to the Veda if you accept the creativity, the cyclical creation? So you have creation and then dissolution. Remember, that's the definition of Brahman, Sutra number 2, the very beginning of our Vedanta part of our course. Janmadyasya yataha. I can't remember if it's on your quiz, but it may be. So in the period of latency, what happens to the Veda? The theory, too, that during universal dissolution, when the universe dissolves, the Veda resides in Prajapati, in this Ishvara, because Ishvara doesn't get dissolved, according to Vedanta. Kamara doesn't accept Ishvara, but he's saying, you Vedantans say there's Ishvara. What happens to the Veda then, between cycles? Does it reside with Prajapati? He says, that's, how do you know, that could be, at best, only be considered doubtful. What ground, why should we accept that? Why should we accept an idea like that? If, however, now, it's another argument. And remember, he's not making these arguments up. He's an intellectual in the 8th, 9th century. So he's having conversations with his Vedanta colleagues. He's actually, most people are theists back then. So he's having these real conversations. And so in the course of which all these arguments are presented. If, however, you assume the eternality of the creator, so the creator is eternal, and the process of creation and dissolution, remember, Vedanta says that Brahman is that from which Janmadhyasya yataha, I'm repeating myself, that from which creation, maintenance, and dissolution emerge. If you accept that the creator is eternal and the cyclical creativity is eternal, then too, we can only admit of a gradual process of creation. You're saying, well, let's go with that. But why should we accept that bang, creation just comes out instantly? Like in Genesis, Genesis is 6 days, but it's more or less instant. But then he says, well, let's say there is creation. Well, all the creations that we see in this world, they're gradual. They don't just bang out of nowhere. They're not just sort of willed from nothing. We could only admit of a gradual process of creation, just as we see in the case of living beings. When you create a jar, it doesn't pop out of the clay in an instant. It takes time to make a jar. So he's giving these arguments that, and we'll see Nyaya is going to say that God's relationship to the world is like the potter to the jar. The jar needs a creator. When you see a pot, jar and pot is the same thing. When you see a pot, you don't just think it's self-manifest. You think there must be a creator. So they say when we see the world, which is infinitely more complex than the pot, then in the same way as we infer a creator for the pot, we infer a creator for the world. It's a bit like William Paisley's argument. I don't know if it's William, but Paisley, I don't know, 18th, 19th century theologian, or maybe earlier, the watch argument. If you're walking along the beach and you see a watch, you don't just think it's just sort of molecules randomly assembled together. You assume there's a watchmaker. So it's called the watchmaker argument. So therefore, this world is like that. So, but he says, okay, let's say you want to take that logic. The world must have a creator, but then how long did it take to make the watch? It didn't just pop out of nowhere, or the pot. So then we could only admit of a gradual process of creation, just as we see in the case of present living beings creating the jar here, meaning a pot. It's just his way of kumbha, of translating the Sanskrit. Okay, so jar, I've been using the term pot up to now, but you could call it a jar. The translator gets to choose how they want to translate it. And as for a pralaya, that's the period in between two creative cycles, right? Cyclical creation, period in between. Pralaya is the name of that. In the form of universal destruction, we find no proofs of admitting that. What proof is there that the world's going to dissolve at the end? Like there's a reverse Big Bang. Some physicists have spoken in the past about reverse Big Bang until they discovered actually it's accelerating. So now some people might say, well, it's still accelerating, but at some point it might slow down, and others might say, well, how do we know it's been going for 8 billion years or whatever, so why couldn't it just keep accelerating forever? So there's no way of answering that question. But both points of view could be possible, right? We don't know. We can't subject that to experimentation. So we have no proof for this, that there's going to be this destruction at the end. And now he said, and even if we accept it, remember, that's how you argue. So we don't accept it. There's no proof for it. But even if you did, nor could such an action of destruction on the part of Prajapati serve any useful purpose. What's the point in destroying the universe and then having a latent period and then creating it again? What is the point of that? And for such souls as have the load of actions, right, karma, they're trapped by their karma, so they have a load of karma that they haven't experienced yet, right? Karma meaning dharma and adharma, right? Dharma means righteous behavior upon them. As for them, there can be no existence during which there is no enjoyment of their results. If they have their karma, why would they remain in a latent period between cycles? How can that, how do you make that work? How can they exist without their karma? Of course, the Vedantins would say they exist in a state of like deep sleep and hibernation. But Kumarala's argument is problematizing that. How would they exist? There's no. How can there be how can they exist without being connected to the results of their work? Which means that they would have to have bodies to experience those results. Nor can the results of one action be restrained by another action. Right? So in other words, your actions can be restrained by God. God can interfere with your karma, which means you act and you're supposed to get a result, but God can intervene. And he says, as held by the Vaisheshika school, right? The atomists, we encountered them in Ramanuja. We said atomist is not a good word for them, but more like the particleists, because they accept these ultimate realities made of infinitesimally small particles. And it's not possible, and he's saying, how can one result of one action be restrained by another action? There'd be a conflict between the law of karma and God's will. And it's not possible for all actions to continue to remain devoid of their results. In other words, in between the cycles, the souls in the previous cycle, they haven't been liberated, so they still got caught by their karma. So they have all these seeds of karma they haven't experienced yet. Well, what happens to the karma in this period of latency? It can't just remain latent as well, right? He's saying, how is it possible for actions to continue to remain devoid of their fruits? That karma is demanding. It's like gravity. It's a force that requires the act to be connected to the effect. You can't just put that whole process on hold for another 14 billion years or whatever it is between cycles. Nor is there any single action, the result of which could be the non-fruition of all other actions. Yoga would say, and Bhakti would say, just by surrender to God, you can eliminate all your karma. So by that one action of complete and utter surrender to God, God removes your karma. And the Jnana traditions, the knowledge traditions would say, knowledge of the Atman burns all your karma. But the Kumarala is not happening now. He's saying there's no single action, the result of which could be the non-fruition of all other actions. There's no one act that's going to destroy all of the karmic consequences of millions and trillions of other actions. And which single action would thereby keep the other actions in check in this period of latency? Let's say that they are latent. Let's say that karma is kept latent. What would keep them latent? What would be the thing that makes them latent? What would be that power? All good questions. Of course, Vedanta has an answer to all of them. But you can see, these are very short, succinct, but powerful arguments. He's not waffling, he's not embellishing them. It's just bang, 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 bang. That's a real philosopher, right? Not wordy, not sort of, ego going on and on, pontificating to show how erudite you are. Just bang, just get right to the core of the argument. What about this? What about that? Even if you say this, then this, then this, in half a dozen words, but see the profundity, the power of those few words. Then again, if all the actions of persons, hang on, let me see, how many verses have we got to get to? 86. Woo, we're making great progress, my friends. And we have got 11 minutes. So we'll have another half a class, and then we have a tape of Dusty, the book that we're reading, God in Indian Philosophy. We read Shankar and Vachaspati, and we're going to be reading again. The author of that, I invited him to join us, and obviously it's online, so he had to tape his course. And he just a 35-minute recording. So this is this week. We did Ramanuja yesterday, and today we're doing Mimamsa. That's it for this week. Push up your quiz, and then next week I'll finish this, and along with Dusty's recording, that will be one session. So it'll be more or less an hour and 20 minutes. It doesn't matter if it's a bit more here and there, given the fact it'd be nice for you to meet the author of the book you're reading. If it wasn't for COVID, he would have come personally. And remember, I told you he was a Rutgers student. So hopefully you'll be curious about what the future could look like for you, my friends. if you decide to do a PhD in Indian philosophy. Your parents might freak out and say, no, beta, aisa mat karo, engineering karo. You become an engineer, you go to pre-med, do pre-med, right? Or your parents are saying, oh, and you say, Mom, Dad, I want to do a PhD in Indian philosophy. They freak out. But you become a very distinguished professor, and then your parents will be happy. So you can tell them, you can show them the clip and say, well, look, he did it. He's a Rutgers student, did a PhD. Look at him now, writing books, very respected, and a professor. So anyway, hopefully it'll be interesting for you to meet him, obviously online. Right, now, so what single action is going to keep all the karma in check? 71. Then again meaning, and here's another problem for you Vedanta people, you Ishvara believing people. Here's another argument. Then again, if all the actions of persons were to be destroyed at dissolution, let's say you destroy them all at dissolution, then no future creation would be possible. What would trigger the next creation? If you're saying karma triggers the next creation, but you can't say that and then say karma is destroyed at the end of the previous creation, there's no karma left then. So what triggers the next creation? So you can't say that karma is destroyed at the dissolution, because then there'll be no future creation. For under the circumstances, if actions were destroyed, what could be the means of bringing out those actions out of their latent state? Okay, maybe not destroyed, but let's say they're latent. There's two different things. Maybe there's a problem with the Sanskrit translation here. Maybe destroyed is too strong a word. Let's say suppressed. I'm not sure. I don't have the Sanskrit. I could check for you. Doesn't matter. But let's say they're latent. Okay, this argument we can make, we can use. What could be the means of bringing out those actions out of their latent state, right? There's creation, beings act, they generate karma. At the end of that creation, they haven't experienced all their karma because they're still acting right till the end. All this karma that is yet to be fulfilled, and they go into a state of latency that souls, karma becomes latent, another period of 14 billion or whatever years. The next cycle, well, what triggers that karma out of inaction? Same argument the Vedanta says against Sankhya. What triggers it? Of course, you know what the theist would say, don't you? Or you can guess, right? Ishvara does that. What could be the means of bringing out those actions? And then he says that, okay, if you say what I just said, if the desire of God be held to be such a means, it's God who activates this karma, then that desire in itself could be an efficient cause of the creation. Then if God's desire is, well, why do you need karma then? Let God's desire be the only thing. Why introduce this other entity, karma? If God is needed to trigger karma, well, why have, or comes razor? Why posit two entities when one is sufficient? So if you're going to say God triggers the latent karma, well, let's just have God create without the need of karma. So if the desire of God be held to be such a means of activating latent, hibernating karma, then that desire in itself could be an efficient cause of the creation. You don't need karma. And if creation were dependent upon God's wishes, it will be useless to assume the agency of act. Then you don't need dharma. When he says dharma and adharma, that's another way of saying karma. The law of karma, the law of action and reaction. Right, good results for dharma, dharmic action. Right, dharma means righteousness, dutifulness, doing your duties. Dharma means the opposite. So why do you need karma? Let's just have God's wish, and then you go back to the old argument. And then if it's just God's wish, why would He wish to create a world of suffering? So it loops back into a previous argument. And it's not possible for God's desire to. It's not possible for the God's desire to be produced with any cause. And let's say it's God's desire. What would cause that desire? You can't have a desire without a cause. There has to be a cause. What would that cause be for God desiring creation? That again loops back into the arguments that we had at the beginning of this section. Okay, so he's sort of articulating this same argument, but now he's situating it in a different sequence of argumentation. So, and it's not possible for God's desire to be produced without any cause. Any desire has a cause. If there be any such cause, right, remember the argument back then was, well, what's the cause of creation? What's triggering that? If there be any such cause of the production of God's desire, then that could also be the cause of the production of the worldly elements also. If you say there's a cause for God's desire, Well, let's get rid of God and just say that cause causes creation by itself. Why does it have to go through the intermediation of a God? There's a cause, let's call it X, which triggers a desire in God to create. Well, if a cause can trigger that desire in God, in some way that cause is controlling God, or having exerting power over God. Whatever the cause of God's desire is, let's call it cause X. Well, let cause X just create if it has that kind of power that it can affect God, well, it must have the power to create the universe by itself. Why do you need a God then? That's the argument. So if there be any such cause for the production of God's desire, then that could also be the cause of the production of the worldly elements. This is non-atheism, my friends. Don't think atheists don't have good arguments. All over the world, at any time, modern, ancient, West, East. Good arguments. Some of the best minds in the world have been theists, and some of the best minds in the world have been atheists. It's not that the one argument's better than the other. It's a question of what does your mind feel is better than what does your mind feel is more intellectually satisfying? And yoga would say, and whatever your answer to that is, your mind is the product of many, many, many past births. So one person's mind in this birth finds the theism more fulfilling, rewarding, and intellectually satisfied, and another person's mind finds non-theistic arguments more satisfying. Why so? Because the Atman is the same. No difference in Atman. The mind is different. And what is the mind? It's accumulation of samskaras, imprints from this life and an infinity of past lives. So therefore, if you feel you're theistically disposed, some of you non-theistically disposed, remember that's not a function or a quality of the Atman. It's a quality of the mind, which is a prakritic overlay, and the mind functions according to its samskaras, its imprints of experience in this life and past lives. It's those experiences that accumulate together and cause one person to feel more intellectually, maybe emotionally, maybe culturally, maybe in many ways, comfortable with theistic points of view, and another person non-theistic. Okay, I think we're getting to a point where I want to stop right there because we're moving into another argument, and we've only got 3 minutes, so let's stop sharing. But boom. How do you like it, my friends? So this is a course in Indian philosophy, and it's focused on God, and it's not focused on one school. And so that we're looking at the schools that accept God, and we notice how the Vedanta lay a lot of stress on scripture. They accept some of these arguments. Yeah, you can't know God. Maybe God is a demon. Maybe by inference you can't know. Remember Ramanuja in the beginning? Sure, inference can tell you, rational thinking can tell you there must be an intelligent cause, but you don't know what the nature of it is. Maybe there's two. Maybe there's a bunch of things. Descartes said maybe it's a demon, like Mimamsa says. How do you know that's trustworthy? We don't really accept that. Yeah, we don't know. Only scripture can tell us that. Mimamsa would then attack. Mimamsa is a bit of a problem there because they accept scripture, not the same. They're not interested in the same scripture, the Upanishad, Vedic portion. They want the old Vedic portion, but they have to accept the whole thing. So notice that they're not arguing based on scripture because they accept the Upanishads. And so they can't say, well, why should we? The Buddhists could say, well, why do we accept your scriptures? We don't accept your scriptures. Some Brahmin made it up, right? Some Brahmin just sat and made this stuff up. Like Marx would say. Marx said, well, religion is written by those who have power. They control the means of production. But the Marxists can't say that. They accept scripture. So we notice how Vedanta might accept some of this. But we've had some of their arguments, right, against it. But they would say only scripture tells us about the nature of Brahman. Okay, so how are we doing for time? We are 1 hour and 18 minutes, and we'll just proceed next week. I don't have anything to say other than I wish you a pleasant rest of the day, and I think we're going to have lovely weather tomorrow. I think it's 80 degrees, so it might probably be the last real burst of good weather. So you have a chance to sit outside, maybe even get to the Jersey Shore, or hope you have a great weekend, and Hope you have fun with this reading and are intellectually stimulated. I hope this helps you, think carefully about what you want to believe in, what you choose to believe in. You're never going to know for sure. You're never going to have absolute 100% confidence. If you're an intellectual, you'll always be aware of the weaknesses of your own position. You'll always, and that's honest and that's good. There should always be some doubt there. Otherwise, you become a fanatic. A fanatic is someone that doesn't allow any doubt. No, 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 no. My tradition says this. I will not consider any other point of view. No. You can have a position, hold it firmly, be a theist, be a non-theist, but with an awareness of the fact that, there are arguments against your position. There always will be. And so, so therefore be a sort of open-minded, non-dogmatic, intellectually open, whatever it is you choose to believe. And hopefully these points of view give you a sense of how arguments can go this way, that way, this way, and they will for eternally. This has never been resolved. Is there a God? Is there not a God? In human history, there've always been, some cultures have been very oppressive and not allowed atheistic voices. We're going to kill you if you're an atheist. We shall burn you at the stake. Fine, but that's not going to remove the doubts silently in someone's mind. You can't go out and proclaim it in the marketplace in fear of your life. There's always going to be arguments for and against. So, you can take a position or be agnostic and say, well, I'm not sure. That's fine. I'm not going to bother with it. I'm going to use my life to do other stuff. But still, if you do hold a belief and you choose to hold a belief, then this kind of argumentation allows you to be a little bit clear about why you believe what you believe, and also be a bit clear about your point of view is never going to be perfect. It's always going to be subject to critique, and that's okay. You can just say, look, I accept this. I think it's the best position. I understand its arguments can be raised against it, but I'm putting my money on this horse. This is where I'm putting my faith, my intellectual faith, and that's it. Nothing wrong with that. Namaskar, and we see you in the next recording.